Hi, I'm God Impaired and welcome to my series on exposing the lies that Christians tell. In this episode, I'll be focusing on one of the most common lies out there, and that is that atheists believe that the universe came from nothing. I'm sick and tired of hearing Christians telling us that according to the Big Bang Theory, our universe came into existence out of nothing. This is a lie that they have concocted to misrepresent what science actually says on the subject. To be fair, I will point out that some physicists do actually use the word nothing when describing the origin of the universe, but they are not using it in the normal sense of the word. This also applies to the words Big Bang for that matter, because it was not an explosion in the normal sense that people would imagine. A well-known Christian apologist who likes to spread this misinformation is William Lane Craig, and he does this in his Kalam Cosmological argument. But first, in order to sound convincing to his audience, he makes dishonest statements about his reliance upon logic.
Now, in order to determine rationally whether or not God exists, we need to conduct our inquiry according to the basic rules of logic.
But this is just a crock of shit, because Craig affirms that he doesn't actually need any arguments or evidence to know that God exists. Even if you had undeniable proof that the Christian faith and God were fictitious, Dr. Craig openly admits that he would still believe. For him, the Christian faith is unfalsifiable.
It's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing Him. This was the way that people in the Bible knew God. Now, if this is the case, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God Himself. We mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the voice of God speaking to our own hearts.
Shit, and here I was thinking that I needed some shred of evidence. What a silly fool I am. Let me paraphrase one of Craig's remarks like this. Simply by immediately experiencing Him is the way that the Yorkshire Ripper knew that God was real. Now, I don't believe that this claim would convince anyone of the existence of God, yet in essence it is exactly the same claim that Craig is making. It should be clear that theists like Craig don't actually need any logical arguments to reach a conclusion, because they already have their conclusions first. Anyway, we'll look a little more closely at his Kalam Cosmological argument, which goes like this. 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. At first, the argument seems intuitively logical, but it all falls apart very quickly when he asserts that this cause of the universe must also be a very powerful disembodied mind, who in itself is an uncaused cause, and that it is also a timeless, spaceless, immaterial being. I'm sorry, I just have to stop Craig right here, because the argument is so illogical now that he's just talking out his arse. Do I really need to point out that something that is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial simply does not exist? You may as well call it literally nothing. Next, he asserts that this literal nothing must also be his imaginary sky daddy friend from the Bible, who just says some magic words and abracadabra, he pops the whole universe into existence out of nothing.
Isn't it incredible that the Big Bang Theory thus confirms what the Christian theist has always believed, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth?
No, sorry Craig, but that's not what the Christian theist has always believed. In fact, every time science makes new discoveries, Christians like Craig just manipulate the Bible to make it fit the new discoveries. The truth is that Genesis and the Big Bang Theory are totally incompatible, and even a liar like Craig must know this fact. What Craig forgot to mention after telling us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth on the first day is that God created plant life on earth on the third day of creation before He created the sun, the moon, and all the stars on the fourth day. It is so obvious that even an idiot can tell that the Big Bang Theory is at odds with the biblical creation account. If we are to believe Genesis, and that God had actually created the heaven and the earth together on the first day, then the earth would have been around at the time of the Big Bang. However, scientifically, we know for a fact that the earth was not created at the time of the Big Bang, but about 9 billion years later. Now, even more ludicrous than this is the notion that there was plant life on Earth before all the trillions of stars of the universe were created. These points alone completely debunk the Genesis myth and prove my point that the Big Bang Theory is at odds with the creation account given in the Bible. Another thing that Craig forgets to mention is that apparently some things do begin to exist without a cause. It was pointed out to Mr. Craig that virtual particles can come into existence uncaused. Now, William Lane Craig denies that the quantum vacuum is actually nothing, because it turns out that he's the expert on nothing and has stated that it is impossible for nothing to exist. Unless, of course, he wants to claim that something like the universe came from nothing, then in that case nothing does exist. But any time someone else uses the word, he just shifts the goalpost and claims that it really isn't nothing. On the subject of virtual particles, he said, "So when popular magazines and articles portray things coming into being in the quantum vacuum uncaused out of nothing, they are using the word nothing in a philosophically naive and misleading sense." Yeah, that's right, Craig. That would be the same way that scientists use the word nothing when they're describing the Big Bang singularity from which our universe was born. To claim that science tells us that the Big Bang singularity, or the entire freaking universe, was literally nothing is just an outright lie. To correct this mistake, I will tell you exactly what scientists mean when they are talking about the origin of the universe. They are saying that when time was zero, the size of the universe was also zero, but it had an infinite density, infinite pressure, infinite temperature, and the curvature of space-time was also infinite. Only a deceitful bastard like Craig would call it nothing. In reality, the universe has always existed, even though it has not always existed in its current form. When confronted with the notion of an actual infinity, Craig is the first one to state that it can't possibly exist in reality, and yet he relies on the standard Big Bang model, which proposes the existence of a singularity which contains multiple infinities.
This shows that infinity is just an idea in your mind, not something that exists in reality.
So rather than actually deal with these infinities, Craig just wants to pretend that the word singularity is just another word for nothing, so that he can keep lying to his listeners and telling them that our universe came from nothing. The easiest way to debunk him is by letting Craig do the talking. In one of his books, while discussing the infinite density of a singularity, he states, "The event that marked the beginning of the universe becomes all the more amazing when one reflects on the fact that a state of infinite density is synonymous to nothing. There can be no object that possesses infinite density, for if it had any size at all, it could still be even more dense." Personally, I believe the only thing more dense than this is the Christian who still thinks that Craig is credible. But seriously now, first he says that something that has infinite density is identical to nothing. This is so stupid and blatantly contradictory, it's just not funny. Then he tries to justify his illogical statement with another absurd claim that if a singularity had any size at all, then it could be even more dense. But the whole point is a singularity doesn't have any size at all, and Craig himself is happy to accept this zero-volume singularity any other time, because he can use it to back up his claim that our universe came from nothing.
This is because as you go back in time, you reach a point at which, in Hoyle's words, the universe was shrunk down to nothing at all.
So if Craig wants to rely on the standard Big Bang model, then he needs to address these actual infinities and stop pretending that they don't exist by calling them nothing. He needs to stop lying to his audience and telling them that this singularity is the same as nothing. I doubt anyone would believe him if he said, "The singularity inside a supermassive black hole with a mass 1 billion times that of our sun is actually just literally nothing." To put his remarks into perspective, Craig will argue that the smallest bit of empty space containing no matter whatsoever can't be actually called nothing. Yet a septillion stars squished into a singularity is literally nothing. How any Christians can take this crap or believe this man is seriously beyond me. The reason that Craig likes this universe began to exist spontaneously out of nothing approach is because it makes his crappy argument sound convincing. The truth of the matter is that Craig doesn't want to admit that the opposite of being caused is being uncaused, and not beginning to exist spontaneously out of nothing. Yet this is exactly the bullshit that he himself is trying to sell in relation to God. Apparently God can exist uncaused and timeless, then create the universe spontaneously and literally out of nothing. Now, that's what we atheists call bullshit.
This is bullshit.
Okay then, so what about the cause of the universe itself, you might ask? Surely something would have had to have happened to cause the universe to begin to exist. After all, everything that begins to exist requires a cause. Yeah, but unfortunately this only makes sense in relation to the passage of time. Common sense dictates that you can't have a before and after or a cause and effect without the passage of time. Think about it like this. If time were frozen right at this moment, then the process of cause and effect becomes impossible. If you went back to the beginning of the universe when time was equal to 0, it would be impossible to have a time before time for cause and effect to occur. An honest theist would have to admit that the process of cause and effect itself also began with time in the Big Bang. So, to ask what caused the universe is like being asked what comes after infinity. Obviously, it doesn't even make sense, since time itself came into existence with the Big Bang, and there was no time before time, then obviously the universe doesn't require a cause for itself. So now we can say that the universe itself didn't need a cause for the beginning of space-time, even though this four-dimensional state has only existed for a finite amount of time. Put simply, although the universe has had a finite past, it never had a beginning. With premise 1 annihilated and premise 2 utterly destroyed, there can be nothing left for this complete failure of an argument. The last line of defense that the theist can resort to is the notion that God used simultaneous causation to prevent the problem of cause and effect being time dependent. But I'm just going to have to leave that for another video. Thanks for watching.